My sister took my car and vanished. When she finally returned it, my nightmare was just beginning. What I found inside left me speechless and angry. The damage was intentional. My sister called me in a panic late at night, begging to borrow my new Toyota for just a couple of days. Her car had broken down, and she had an important project at work. As an older brother, I agreed to help, figuring it was a small favor and something I could easily do for family. The weekend came and went, but my car didn't return. When I texted her on Monday, she responded with a vague, "Still need it for a bit. We'll bring it back soon." I assumed it was just a minor delay, maybe she had some extra errands or hadn't finished what she needed the car for. But when a bit turned into a week, my patience started wearing thin. Each time I reached out, there was a new excuse. Work had been hectic. Her friend needed a ride. She was out of town but would be back soon. Days stretched into weeks, and soon, it had been a full month. At that point, I was beyond frustrated. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience anymore. I had to take public transport to work, adjust my schedule, and borrow rides from friends. Meanwhile, my sister was cruising around in my car as if it were her own. By the time we hit the 2-month mark, I stopped asking nicely. I demanded my car back, but she either dodged my calls or hit me with more empty promises. At one point, I even considered reporting it stolen, but the thought of involving the police against my own sister made me hesitate. I held on to the hope that she would do the right thing. Then, 3 months after I had first handed her the keys, my sister finally returned my car. The sight of it nearly made my stomach drop. The once pristine exterior was covered in scratches and dents. The front bumper looked slightly misaligned, and there was a mysterious stain on the back seat that I didn't even want to investigate. The inside reeked of stale fast food, and worse, the check engine light was glaring at me from the dashboard. I confronted my sister immediately, demanding to know what had happened. She shrugged it off, saying the car was fine when she last drove it, and that maybe someone hit it while it was parked. I pointed out the deep scratches and dents, damage that wasn't there before, and asked her point blank if she had been in an accident. She denied everything. Worse, she outright refused to pay for any repairs. Now, I'm left wondering, what really happened to my car, and how am I supposed to get her to take responsibility? The first week after lending my sister my car, I started to feel uneasy. At first, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe work really had kept her busy, maybe she was running errands, or maybe she just hadn't gotten around to bringing it back. But when my calls started going straight to voicemail and my texts were left on read, my patience wore thin. Then, one evening, as I scrolled through Instagram, my stomach dropped. There she was, laughing, drink in hand, at a beach party in a neighboring town. And there, unmistakably, in the background of one of her stories, was my car. My brand new Toyota, parked on the sandy lot, the same car she had sworn she needed for work emergencies. Rage surged through me. She wasn't stuck at work. She wasn't stranded with a broken-down car. She was partying. Using my car. Without a care in the world. I didn't hesitate. I fired off a message, my fingers shaking as I typed. "I want my car back now. This wasn't some free pass for you to use it however you please. You said you needed it for work, not beach trips. If you don't bring it back by tomorrow, I'm coming to get it myself." No response. I could see she had read it. Those 3 little dots appeared for a second before disappearing. But no reply. No explanation. The next day, I tried calling again, but she sent me straight to voicemail. My patience was gone. I messaged her again, more forcefully this time. "You have until tonight. If the car isn't back in my driveway, I'll take this to the next level." Still nothing. By the end of the week, my frustration had turned into something darker, betrayal. This was no longer just about a car. It was about trust. I had helped her when she needed me, and this was how she repaid me? Lying, dodging my calls, using my car like it was her own personal toy? And then came the final straw. Scrolling through Instagram again, I saw another story. This time, she and her friends were filming themselves driving down a scenic coastal road, music blasting, wind in their hair. It was carefree, fun, exactly the kind of trip I would have loved to take. But the worst part? My car was in the frame again. The driver wasn't even my sister, it was one of her friends behind the wheel. I felt sick. Not only had she stolen my car for a joyride, but she was letting other people drive it? People I didn't even know? I clenched my fist and tried to breathe, but I knew I couldn't let this slide. It was time to take action. By the time I finally got my sister to meet me, my frustration had reached its peak. After a week of unanswered calls and ignored messages, I had nothing left but anger and determination. I was ready to demand my car back and refused to listen to any of her excuses. But when she arrived, she didn't come with defiance or defensiveness. Instead, she looked broken. Her eyes were swollen and red, her shoulders slumped as if she had been carrying the weight of the world. She sat down heavily, barely able to lift her gaze. She started explaining everything at once, her words tumbling out in a mess of emotions. Her boyfriend had left her. blindsiding her with a breakup she never saw coming. Work had become unbearable, with mounting pressure from her boss and the looming fear of losing her job. She admitted to feeling lost, overwhelmed, and unable to handle everything crashing down around her. The logical part of my mind told me to stay firm, to keep the focus on the fact that she had been using my car for weeks without permission. But seeing her like this, unraveling under the weight of her own struggles, made it difficult to hold on to that anger. Growing up, I had always been the one to step in when things got too hard for her, the one to offer support when no one else would. Even now, after all the frustration she had caused, that old instinct surfaced again. She kept explaining how the car had been her escape, the one thing that made her feel like she still had some control over her life. She hadn't meant to ignore me or take advantage of my kindness. She had just felt too ashamed and afraid to face me, knowing I would be disappointed in her. A conflict raged inside me. I knew she was manipulating my emotions, leaning on the history between us to get what she wanted. But I also knew she was struggling, and despite everything, it was hard to ignore the pain in her voice. Against my better judgment, I agreed to let her keep the car for one more week. The anger was still there, but it was dulled by the familiar weight of obligation. I told myself that this would be the last time, that once the week was up, I would take the car back no matter what. As I walked away, a sinking feeling settled in my chest. I knew deep down that she wasn't going to return the car in a week. And I knew that once again, I had let myself be pulled into her cycle of excuses and empty promises. A month passed, and my patience had worn thin. My sister had made no effort to return my car. Every time I reached out, the same pattern repeated: ignored calls, vague text replies, empty promises that never materialized. At this point, I had stopped believing anything she said. Then, one afternoon at work, I received a message from a colleague. Attached was a photo that made my stomach drop. It was my car, unmistakable with its custom window decal, parked outside a local restaurant. The logo on the insulated bag being carried out of the driver's seat confirmed it. My sister had been using my car for food deliveries. A rush of emotions hit me at once. She hadn't just been holding on to my car for convenience. She had turned it into a business asset, using it as a courier vehicle. Worse, she had done this without my knowledge, without my permission, and without the necessary insurance for commercial driving. The realization filled me with fury. This wasn't just carelessness, it was recklessness. If something happened, if there was an accident, it would be my insurance on the line, my finances at risk. She hadn't even had the decency to tell me what she was doing. Instead, she had let me believe that she was still struggling, still overwhelmed, when in reality, she was driving my car all over town to make money for herself. I immediately started looking into what this meant legally. My personal insurance wouldn't cover commercial use, and if she got into an accident while making deliveries, the financial consequences would land squarely on me. The potential liability was staggering. I imagined the worst: claims denied, lawsuits filed, my premiums skyrocketing. Panic turned to frustration, and frustration turned to a burning sense of betrayal. This wasn't just about a borrowed car anymore. It was about trust, responsibility, and the sheer audacity of her actions. She hadn't borrowed my car, she had stolen it in every way that mattered. That night, I sent her a message she couldn't ignore. I laid out everything I had learned, every legal risk, every consequence she had put on my shoulders. I made it clear that I wasn't going to tolerate it anymore. I demanded the car back immediately. Then, I braced myself for her response. Days after confronting my sister about using my car for deliveries, I thought the situation couldn't possibly get worse. I was already dealing with the stress of knowing she had been putting my finances and insurance at risk, ignoring my demands to return the car. But then, the universe decided to throw one more punch. One evening, as I sorted through my mail, I noticed an official-looking envelope from the Department of Motor Vehicles. My stomach clenched before I even opened it. The contents confirmed my worst fear. Inside were multiple notices of unpaid speeding fines, totaling $800. Each violation had been captured by traffic cameras, complete with time-stamped images of my car. The license plate was unmistakably mine. The violations had been issued over the past month, with locations scattered across town, all during late-night hours. There was no question about it. While I had been waiting for her to return my car, my sister had been tearing through the streets, racking up fines under my name. A slow, simmering rage settled in. Not only had she lied about needing my car for work emergencies, ignored my repeated demands for its return, and used it to make money behind my back, but now she had gotten me into legal trouble. These weren't just tickets. If left unpaid, they would escalate. My driving record could take a hit. My insurance rates could skyrocket. And worst of all, the system saw me as the one responsible. I sat there for a long time, staring at the violations, debating my next move. My instinct was to call her immediately, to demand an explanation, to demand payment. But deep down, I already knew what would happen. She would deflect. She would play the victim. She would promise to handle it, just like she had promised to return my car weeks ago. And nothing would change. For the first time, I truly considered legal action. This wasn't just about family anymore. This was about consequences. If I didn't act now, how much more damage could she cause? I took a deep breath, knowing I was at a crossroads. Allowing this to continue meant enabling her recklessness. Confronting her could mean destroying whatever family bond we had left. But as I held those tickets in my hands, one thing became clear. This situation had spiraled beyond control. I had to stop it before it got even worse. As I stacked the violation notices on my desk, a sense of finality washed over me. I had reached my limit. The question wasn't whether I was going to take action. It was how far I was willing to go to make sure she finally faced the consequences of her choices. After everything that had happened, the lies, the ignored messages, the reckless driving, and now the speeding tickets, I had reached my breaking point. I sent my sister one final message, making it crystal clear that I was done playing games. The car needed to be returned immediately, or I would escalate the situation legally. There would be no more negotiations, no more chances. Hours passed with no response. I expected defiance, maybe another excuse, but instead, the night dragged on in silence. Then, at 2 a.m., I heard something outside. A sharp metallic clang echoed against the pavement. I looked through my window and saw nothing but darkness. Hesitantly, I stepped outside, my breath forming small clouds in the cold air. There, lying haphazardly on the driveway, were my car keys. No note, no message, just the keys thrown carelessly as if the entire situation had meant nothing. My sister hadn't even bothered to knock, let alone face me. A wave of exhaustion washed over me. It was finally over. Or so I thought. The next morning, I went outside to inspect the car. My relief shattered the moment I saw it. Deep scratches ran along the entire side, jagged and erratic, as if someone had deliberately keyed the paint. The front bumper was cracked, part of it barely hanging on, and one of the headlights had a large spiderweb fracture across the glass. I felt my stomach tighten. This wasn't just damage from neglect. This was personal. It was punishment, retaliation for daring to stand up for myself. She hadn't simply returned the car. She had made sure to leave one final insult behind. I stood there, taking in the destruction, my mind racing between disbelief and fury. The repair costs alone would be massive. The scratches weren't something a quick polish could fix, and the bumper would likely need to be replaced entirely. It was no longer just about money. It was about the sheer disrespect, the complete disregard for everything I had done for her. I thought about calling her, about demanding an explanation, but deep down, I already knew how that conversation would go. She would minimize the damage, claim it wasn't her fault, or worse, turn it around on me, accuse me of being overdramatic, of making a big deal out of nothing. I had seen this pattern too many times before. As I traced my fingers over the scratches, my frustration hardened into something else, resolve. I had spent months chasing after my car, giving her chance after chance, believing she would finally take responsibility. But this was proof that she never would. This wasn't just the end of the car situation. This was the end of something far bigger. I had given my sister more patience than she deserved, more trust than she had earned. Now, it was time to decide what came next. The rage and disappointment from seeing my car battered and vandalized hadn't settled when a thought struck me. There had to be more to this. The damage was too deliberate, too extensive. Something didn't add up. Then I remembered the security camera. Months ago, I had installed a small camera overlooking the driveway, mainly for package deliveries and general security. I hadn't thought about it much, but now, with everything that had happened, it might just have the answers I needed. Without hesitation, I opened the app on my phone and scrolled through the footage from the previous night. At first, there was nothing but the quiet stillness of the street, dimly illuminated by the streetlights. Then, an hour before my sister tossed the keys, her car appeared on the screen. She was trying to park, but instead of maneuvering carefully, she reversed too fast, the angle all wrong. The rear of the car swung dangerously close to the edge of my driveway, and then, impact. The screen shook slightly as my sister crashed into the pole at the edge of the driveway, the loud metallic crunch cutting through the night. I watched in stunned silence as she sat motionless for a moment, the brake lights glowing like twin red eyes in the darkness. Then, instead of stepping out to assess the damage, she pulled forward and awkwardly attempted to realign the car. For the next 15 minutes, I watched as she scrambled to cover up her mistake. She got out, pacing in front of the car, then opened the trunk and rifled through it, likely looking for anything to wipe down the bumper. She crouched beside the vehicle, running her hands along the scratched surface, rubbing furiously as if sheer determination could erase the damage. At one point, she even tried to smooth out the cracked bumper with her sleeve, as if that would somehow fix the problem. Then, as if deciding there was nothing more she could do, she stood, grabbed the keys, and hurled them onto my driveway before leaving without a second glance. I sat back in my chair, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. This was proof, undeniable, visual evidence of her recklessness. She had crashed my car and then had the audacity to try and hide it. Worse, she had thrown it back at me like it was my problem to deal with. The anger I felt before was nothing compared to what burned through me now. This wasn't just a careless mistake. This was calculated deceit. She had known exactly what she did, and rather than owning up to it, she had tried to cover it up like a guilty child caught red-handed. I knew I had to confront her, but this time, it wouldn't be through text or calls she could ignore. This time, I had proof. This time, she wouldn't be able to wriggle her way out of responsibility. What happened next wouldn't just determine the fate of my car. It would determine whether my sister could ever be trusted again. With the footage saved on my phone, I knew the confrontation with my sister was inevitable. I had proof, undeniable, crystal clear evidence that she had crashed my car and then tried to cover it up. There was no escaping the truth this time. I messaged her, telling her we needed to talk immediately. Unsurprisingly, she stalled, acting as if she had no idea what I was referring to. But I wasn't going to let her dodge me again. I made it clear this wasn't a discussion she could ignore. When we finally met, her expression was guarded, her posture tense. She was prepared to argue, but she had no idea what was coming. I wasted no time and went straight to the point, asking her directly about the damage, giving her one final chance to admit what she had done. She scoffed, rolling her eyes as if I was being unreasonable. She insisted she had no idea what I was talking about, claiming that she had returned the car exactly as she had received it. She brushed off my accusations, calling me paranoid and dramatic, acting as if I was inventing problems just to make her feel bad. That's when I pulled out my phone. I pressed play, and silence fell between us as the footage spoke for itself. The grainy video clearly showed her behind the wheel, the moment of impact, the way she had jumped out and tried to rub away the damage. Every single action, captured and undeniable. The color drained from her face for a moment, her lips parting slightly in shock. But rather than admit guilt, rather than apologize, she did what she always did. She turned the situation around. Her expression hardened, and suddenly, the anger that should have been mine became hers. She lashed out, throwing her hands up, demanding to know how I could treat her this way. Her voice grew sharp, accusing me of being heartless, of betraying family over a stupid car. She spat words designed to cut, painting me as the villain. She brought up childhood memories, the times I had protected her, the sacrifices I had made. She twisted it all, using my past kindness against me. In her mind, I was supposed to keep covering for her, no matter how much she took advantage of me. That's what siblings were for, she insisted. That's what family did. I stood there, listening as she tried to manipulate the situation, turning my justified anger into something cruel and unfair. But this time, I didn't waver. This wasn't about a minor mistake. This was about trust, about respect, about the endless cycle of enabling her recklessness. She kept waiting for me to cave, to let my guilt override my frustration. But I didn't. For the first time, she saw that I wasn't backing down, and that realization made her furious. The confrontation had left a bitter taste in my mouth. My sister's attempt to manipulate the situation had failed, but she still refused to take responsibility. She had crashed my car, tried to cover it up, and when caught, made me out to be the villain. But no amount of guilt-tripping was going to change the facts. I had reached my limit. After getting a full assessment of the damage, the numbers were worse than I expected. The deep scratches along the side required a complete repainting, the smashed bumper had to be replaced, and the headlight needed repairs. The mechanic also pointed out internal damage from neglect, signs that my car had been driven roughly for months without proper maintenance. On top of that, I still had to deal with the unpaid speeding fines that had arrived in my mailbox. The final total, $3,000. I sent my sister a detailed breakdown of the costs along with a firm message. She had one option: pay up. There would be no more discussions, no more debates. I wasn't asking her to cover some exaggerated sum. I was billing her for the exact amount of the damage she caused. If she didn't want to pay, I would take legal action. Her response came swiftly, not in the form of payment, but as a full-blown family attack. Within hours, I started receiving messages from our parents. They weren't asking for my side of the story. They weren't trying to understand what had happened. They had already made up their minds. My sister had gotten to them first, spinning a tale of how I had turned against her during one of the hardest times of her life. She painted herself as the struggling, broken young woman who had only needed a little help, but instead of standing by her, her own brother had chosen to betray her over money. The accusations came in waves. Our mother called me heartless, insisting that families should never demand money from each other. Our father echoed the sentiment, accusing me of turning my back on my own sister when she needed support the most. They didn't mention the car. They didn't mention the fines. They didn't acknowledge the months of deception, reckless behavior, or the financial burden she had dumped on me. None of that mattered. To them, the only thing that mattered was that I had dared to hold her accountable. The weight of their disappointment was suffocating. I had spent my whole life trying to be the responsible one, the one who held everything together while my sister stumbled from one bad decision to the next. And now, for the first time, I had drawn a firm boundary, and they hated me for it. I debated responding, trying to explain my side, trying to make them see the full picture. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't change anything. They had always shielded my sister from consequences, always rushed to her defense no matter how badly she messed up. This was no different. The realization was sobering. This wasn't just about the car or the money. This was about years of imbalance, years of enabling, years of my sister knowing she could do whatever she wanted and have our parents clean up the mess for her. But this time, I wasn't cleaning it up. I refused to back down. I sent a final message, short, direct, and without emotion. She owed me $3,000, and if she didn't pay, I would take her to small claims court. No more debates, no more guilt, no more manipulation. For the first time in my life, I wasn't playing the role of the responsible older brother who put family above all else. This time, I was simply a person demanding what was rightfully his. And whatever fallout came next, I was ready for it. Filing a police report wasn't something I ever thought I'd have to do against my own sister, but she had left me with no choice. The moment I stepped into the station, the weight of what I was about to do settled on my shoulders. I wasn't just taking legal action over a car. I was drawing a hard line that would forever alter our family dynamic. The officer listened patiently as I laid out everything. The unauthorized use of my vehicle, the reckless driving, the speeding fines, the damage, and her complete refusal to take responsibility. When I mentioned the security footage, he nodded, confirming that I had strong evidence. I didn't want to press criminal charges, but I needed the incident officially documented in case she continued refusing to pay. The officer filed my complaint, and before I left, he advised me to follow up with a small claims court filing if she didn't cooperate. That night, word got back to my sister. I expected another round of manipulation, more attempts to make me feel like the villain. Instead, for the first time, she panicked. She sent a rushed, frantic message, suddenly eager to negotiate. She couldn't afford to pay the $3,000 upfront, but she promised to make payments in installments. There was no apology, no admission of guilt, just the realization that she had finally backed herself into a corner. At that moment, I felt no victory, no relief, just exhaustion. She had the money all along, maybe not in full, but enough to start paying me back at any point before things escalated to this. But she had chosen to avoid, deflect, and manipulate instead. It was never about her being unable to take responsibility, it was about her refusing to until she was forced. With no trust left between us, I drafted an official agreement for the payments and had her sign it. Every installment would be tracked, and if she missed a single one, I wouldn't hesitate to pursue further legal action. Despite getting what I was owed, there was no fixing the damage this had done to our family. My parents never forgave me for taking things too far. In their eyes, I wasn't a brother looking for justice, I was the cold-hearted sibling who had turned against family over money. No matter how much evidence I had, no matter how many times I explained the truth, they refused to see my side. Holidays became strained. Conversations turned superficial. I became the outsider, the one who had shattered the illusion they had built around my sister. And maybe that was for the best. For the first time, I saw my family clearly, how they had always excused her, how they had always expected me to absorb the consequences of her actions without complaint. Walking away from that dynamic wasn't easy, but it was necessary. My sister paid off the debt over several months, but the money didn't change anything. Our relationship was beyond repair, and I no longer felt the need to mend it. I had learned a painful but valuable lesson. Sometimes, family isn't about blood. It's about respect, accountability, and trust. And once those things are gone, there's no going back. I didn't lose a sister, I simply stopped pretending I had one.